Yeah, good morning, viewers, and here I am again with you once again. I've been missing for a few weeks on our monthly program, but I'm here today. And today, like every other occasion when we have this program, we try to provide education for the nation in relation to issues that relates to the contribution that Lyndon, Forbes, Sampson, and Burnham has made to this country. I would like to apologize to our regular viewers for not being here for 3 occasions because of the elections that were recently held on the 2nd of March. But as usual, we are here again, and today, like other days, we will be looking specifically at a topic that should be of interest to all of Guyana as it relates to the individual Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham. Like everything else, the ideas of Forbes Burnham, the way in which our development program has unfolded since the 50s right down to the present time, has its genesis in a number of issues and activities that has today influenced our conduct, our behavior, our economic perception of things developmental, and also it has affected our kind of relationship amongst all Guyanese. Guyana is a land of 6 people, but there are 2 major groups in this country, the Afro-Guyanese and the Indian Guyanese, and the smaller groups that make up our country. But over the years, there are a number of things that have affected us. And Lyndon, Forbes, Sampson, and Burnham had ideas as to how these issues could be addressed. And particularly for today, with me in the studio is Vincent Alexander, chairman of the Forbes Burnham Foundation. And we will try to perhaps go back in time, taking account of our present situation, and try to examine how we have arrived where we are. Good morning to you, Vincent.
Good morning, Clayton. Good morning to the viewers.
I have to maintain my social distance because of the COVID-19. And today, I just want us to go back in time in relation to our history, in relation to our politics, how we have gotten here.
Thanks very much, Clayton. Clayton, I think it's incumbent upon us at the commencement of this program to call on all Guyanese to continue to observe the various measures which have been introduced by the government as a preventative approach to COVID-19. I think there's something symptomatic here that we ought to make a note of. There are some people who have come out and said funny things about the measures of the government, that this COVID-19 is being used for political purposes and things like that. I think that is symptomatic of the problem we're about to discuss today. The fact that we do not have a society where there is cohesion, where there is trust, where there is working together, and irrespective of the reality, people have their own sometimes false realities that guide their behavior. So, for example, you can have somebody who has COVID-19 saying, I don't have it. It's political for them to say I have it. And we've actually had that experience that has led to subsequent mandatory quarantining. But I have heard of other people in other parts of the country continuing to say, well, COVID-19 is no problem, it's the government using it for political purposes. No, I'm trying to encourage all Guyanese to see COVID-19 as a real, not Guyana problem, as a global problem.
It's a worldwide problem.
A worldwide problem, which is affecting Guyana as well. And therefore to take seriously the advisements coming from the government in relation to what we need to do and what we need not to do if we are to ensure that we don't become victims of COVID-19. Having said that, Clayton, yes, we have just had elections.
General and regional elections on the 2nd of March 2020.
These elections have once again turned out to be what I call the ethnic census. I have had the opportunity to sit through, this is my third national election, sitting at the pinnacle of the system and being able to have a global view of the returns in terms of how people have voted. And it is one of the most obvious things when one sits in that position is the recognition of the ethnic nature of our voting. Ethnic nature of our voting. That certain communities vote for one party almost 100%, and other communities vote for another party almost 100%. And the question that arises out of this is the functionality of a democracy, so-called, where what dominates is ethnic voting. And what underlines ethnic voting is not just a matter of numbers. And so probably we need to do a historical review of our ethnic enclaves to understand the problem. Where did this problem start? This problem started with the coming of the Europeans. We were, for all intentions, inhabited by some Amerindian tribes. And I say some because there were other tribes that came subsequently.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
I think that fact ought to be noted as well. Occupied by Amerindian tribes. Here came the Europeans, conquests, attempting to enslave the Amerindians, to work on their plantations. That very act was the source of antagonism between the inhabitants and the conquerors. So the very beginning of this place called Guyana, in its present form, witnessed an antagonistic relationship between those who came and those who were here. Having failed in that first attempt, they then sought to bring labor in the form of enslaved people. Now that itself was an antagonistic relationship, a relationship where you had some people proclaiming themselves to be humans and others they proclaimed to be chattel, property, and so imposing upon them a regime of forced free labor, an antagonistic relationship between two groups. More than that, they also sought, in some instances, to seek the support of the Amerindians as people who would then capture, get away enslaved. So here is the introduction of a third antagonistic relationship between the enslaved and the Amerindians, because the Amerindians were enticed to capture these people and to return them for a fee, and in some instances even to behead them as proof of the fact that they had in fact captured them. So we see this state being built on antagonism. Amerindians, Europeans, Africans, Africans, Amerindians. Slavery is abolished. The Africans used the moment of freedom to do what is essentially capitalist. To bargain in the market, demand and supply. We are the supply of labor. You are demanding labor. We are calling a price because of the need you have for a scarce commodity. Capitalist tenants. What do the plantation owners do? They resort to the importation of indentured laborers to affect, to manipulate the market. And so what in fact they do, they bring into the country Chinese, Portuguese, and in large numbers, Indians. Impact of which was either to get the enslaved people to work for the wages they wish to offer, or in fact to replace the enslaved people with others. Antagonism again. If I am a force struggling for justice in the market, and other elements are brought in to
prevent
defeat
that.
my effort, then you introduce in an antagonistic relationship with those other people. So that we start off with a clear understanding that the relations, which could be referred to as race relations in Guyana, are built on antagonistic relations. They're built on antagonism. And that antagonism occurs in instances where the people are themselves different culturally. So you have a natural difference, which need not be antagonistic, but you have imposed, engineered the difference, which is antagonistic. And so you have a society that is essentially built on antagonism. You don't have natural cohesion, you don't have natural synergies among the people because of the manner in which the place
These relationships were developed.
inhabited. So I think we need to understand that. And the 2 points I'm making here which need to be understood. One, that we're naturally different people because we come from different cultures, we have different belief systems,
Right.
etc. Now that does not necessarily have to be antagonistic. But when you introduce antagonism by the kind of competition between these groups, the kind of animosities between these groups, and you build onto that prejudices and stereotypes. You have prejudices and stereotypes about the African Guyanese and prejudices and stereotypes about the Indo-Guyanese, and they adopt these, and the Amerindian Guyanese, and they themselves adopt these prejudices and stereotypes. Then you have certainly constructed, almost in a conscious way, a society that is not cohesive, a society that is not integrated, a society in which there are factions. And in addition to that, the geographical settlement of these groups reinforces that division. The geographical settlement. The Amerindians are where they are to a large extent. The Indo-Guyanese, to a very large extent, ended up on the
Plantations.
the plantations, what we call the extra-nuclear communities. The African Guyanese ended up in villages and ended up in the towns. Build this antagonism. And what is interesting is that those who are authors of this do not take any responsibility for it. What they do is now say to us that they have established universal norms that we have to live by. We have to live by. Without any reference to the fact that we have problems beyond those universal norms, of which they are the conscious creators and authors. I think in some regards we ourselves came to recognize the problem. And so I want to fast forward. We have gone through periods of struggle. We've gone through instances where there have been collaboration between the groups out of common interests. Not that the differences disappeared, but out of common interests. One oppressor, so you collaborate to get rid of the oppressor. But when you get rid of the oppressor, then your differences are the next set of antagonisms to be dealt with. So we started the independence struggle, the colonization struggle, and we see 1949, 1950 as a high point in that commencement. And the problem that we are talking about is confronted in some regards at that time. You have an attempt to form the People's Progressive Party, and you have Chedi Jagan emerging as a leading founder of that party. But then you see a conscious effort at that time to find an African Guyanese to join with Chedi to form that party. Why is that so? That in itself is a recognition that you have a society where you need at the level of leadership to reflect its composition, to reflect how it is constituted. And so you have Jagan, you had the Ashton Chase as a potential African Guyanese, who I am told declined that opportunity. And then you have a foreigner, a Jamaican, saying to the liberation movement here in Guyana that you have in England a young Guyanese who would have already distinguished himself as a leader by virtue of the leadership he gave in the West Indian Student Society in London, and his further involvement in the Communist Party and so on in London, that here is an African Guyanese who seems to be fit and proper,
equipped
for leadership. And so it is accepted that given the nature of politics in Guyana, the nature of the society, and the need for the coming together of the ethnic groups if we're going to have a real anti-colonial struggle, that Burnham would be invited into the fray. He is invited into the fray and is sent to Jamaica for internship. He doesn't come home directly. He comes home via Jamaica, where he goes to sit at the feet of Norman Manley, who would have been considered at that time as one of the leading anti-colonialists in the Caribbean, in the West Indies. Already have a political party and things like that, to get a feel of the anti-colonial struggle and the struggle for independence. So Burnham goes to Norman Manley. I think there are 2 points we need to make there. One, it is continued recognition of the need for a Burnham to be a part of the leadership, but at the same time a recognition of the commonalities that we share with the West Indies, and therefore the engagement of a West Indian leader in giving leadership, in giving
guidance,
tutelage, guidance,
I say guidance
to Burnham in that regard. And we need to note that point and to park it, because it is a point that has continued to be a point of reference in our problem, in our periods of problem, going to the West Indies, going to the Caribbean for assistance. So the point I'm making here, Clayton, is that in 1949, 1950, with the formation of the PPP, there was a recognition of the nature of the Guyanese society and the need for the ethnic groups, and in this instance the 2 major ethnic groups, to come together if we were going to have a successful mass party and a successful anti-colonial struggle. We need to register that fact, because that need in many regards has continued on to today. And it's not a need that I'm creating, it's a need that was recognized in 1949, 1950, coming out of that history to which I refer. Now, unfortunately, we had the problems with the party, we had the split, and we saw the wisdom of 1949, 1950 when we look at all that occurred. All that occurred between the period of 1953 on to present day. Clear recognition that what we were trying to do in 1949, 1950 was necessary and was correct. Might not have done it exactly the right way, but the fact that we recognized there is a problem to be addressed, and an attempt was made to address it. Now, we need also to recognize that this problem continued to confront us, and we continued in instances to look for a solution to the problem. So we see that during the Burnham regime, those 28 years so frequently spoken of, in fact, it's 25 years, 3 of those years, 5 of those years, or 3, can't remember exactly, were the Hoyt regime. We saw attempts at confronting this problem again. We saw the unity talks between Burnham and the Jagan in the 70s. Those unity talks did 2 things. The unity talks recognized there was a problem that existed, and there was need to confront the problem. And so there was unity talks. We even had instances of critical support that had more to do with confronting external forces, given our nationalization,
economic nature,
problems.
more or less.
But they had those talks, unity talks. Those talks were not successful, and I'm advised that those talks were not successful because although Burnham and Jagan came virtually to a conclusion in those talks, with the last element of difference being national service, that when Burnham proposed the solution to national service, You know, there's a lot of misgivings about national service and a lot of misinformation. The greatest part of the misinformation that national service was an imposition on people.
Yeah.
And why I say it was the greatest part of the misinformation, the larger part of national service was the youth corps. And the youth corps was voluntary. A small element of national service was university students. They were the ones who had to, as a matter of obligation, to attend national service. But it was presented to the world at large as if this whole thing called national service was an imposition on people.
Well, it's technically really, well, if you're going to be enjoying free education at tertiary and level, I think part of the thinking was that you should serve some time to
But
understand.
This is not only
the history of
serving
the
some
country.
time later. The idea of Burnham in that aspect was also to, if you are a developing country and you're confronting a hostile environment, you can't have a divided society. You have to have a unison. And the idea of national service from the standpoint of the university students was to try to get them onto one line of thought,
Yes.
an orientation.
To understand your country,
that
whatever
will make
it is.
them come to the labor force as a part of a cohesive force, rather than coming to the labor force divided. So that was the idea behind it. In any case, that was the contention. This thing was mandatory, this thing was an imposition, but that was the smaller part of national service. But I'm making the point to say that this was a major issue in the unity talks in the 70s. A major issue, and the last outstanding issue. And they adjourned and came back, and Burnham said to Jagan, I have a proposition to resolve the problem that's outstanding. And that proposition was that since you guys have complained about national service, and more particularly complained about females, Indo-Guyanese females having to go to national service, I will make the female involvement of national service voluntary. In other words, no female, Indo nor Afro-Guyanese, would be imposed upon to go to national service from the University of Guyana. They'd have a choice. And so the problem that was being presented no longer existed. Burnham had made a complete resolution of that problem, and they had previously agreed on everything else, the form of government and all of that. But to the nation's dismay, and to our detriment to this day, Janet Jagan led a walkout of those talks, which were conclusive talks. And so we did not achieve the unity government in the 70s, something which was needed and something which we were on the verge of achieving. It was jettisoned and sabotaged by Janet Jagan. But again, what we need to note is that the fact that we had those talks was a recognition of the problem and the need for a solution. This repeated itself in the 80s when Burnham and Jagan once again were engaged in unity talks. And again, these talks were making some headway, but unfortunately, Burnham died before those talks were concluded. And the talks never saw the light of day after his death. How it did not continue along that path. But again, the point I want to make is that the talks in the 80s was a recognition by Burnham and Jagan of the national problem, which has its genesis in what I referred to earlier, and the need for a solution to that problem. And so, the point I'm making all along, Clayton, is that we have had a society that was built on antagonistic relations. These were engineered by the colonizers in their interests. And that we have never been able to re-engineer our society to overcome those what may be considered inherent antagonistic relations. But we have recognized the problem, and the recognition of the problem was exemplified in what we attempted to do in the late 40s, the early 50s, in terms of the mass party, the PPP, at that time, which was made up of Burnham as the chairman and Chetty Jagan as the parliamentary leader. The subsequent talks in the 70s between the PPP and the PNC. The subsequent talks in the 80s between the PPP and the PNC. All of which was a recognition of our problem and the need for us to resolve the problem. We have not been able to resolve the problem, and we've continued with elections that are ethnic censuses and that in fact provide a moment for that problem to become more obvious. You know, it's like a curve for the problem to become more obvious in the struggle for one group to have dominance because of common interests that they have, historic common interests, because of antagonisms that they have, historic antagonisms, and so we've continued along that path. And so really, I think that what the Burnham Foundation seeks to do in this regard is to come to the table and say, look, Guyana historically has had a problem. Burnham Foundation, which is here to keep the legacy of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham alive, takes note of the fact that Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, whatever they may say of him, was a part of a movement in 1949, 1950, on to 53, on to 55, that sought to confront this problem by virtue of the political party at that time that they formed, and which naturally led to a unified government and things like that. That Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham continued to exhibit recognition of the problem by virtue of his engagement in talks with Chetty Jagan in the 70s. He continued not to bury his head in the sand like an ostrich, but to recognize the problem, though he was in power, by virtue of the talks in the 80s. And that we as a nation need to look to see what these gentlemen did in recognition of the problem, and that in fact the gentlemen recognized the problem, and in recognition of the problem sought a solution, and that we should be trying to build on what they did rather than simply to persist in a system which was constructed to fail us. It was never constructed to make us a united people. It was constructed to divide us, to rule us, and we've continued with that system, notwithstanding that we've had leaders in the past who have recognized the nature of the problem and who have essayed what they consider to be necessary for a resolution of the problem. And so even as we confront these problems, these elections today about winners and losers, without any reference to the election themselves, and any prejudicing of what the numbers may be, we ought to recognize that the bigger problem we are faced with is not the problem of who wins or who loses, but the problem that we have a society built on antagonisms, and that the extent to which what has emerged are ethnic parties is the extent to which elections or no elections, we continue to have a problem that will not allow for us to come together as a collective to deal with the resources which we have for the purpose of the better life which we talk about.
I think you have said a lot, Vincent, and I've been getting a lot of calls. I want to give those callers an opportunity to share in this discussion, because I think the topic in itself is very important, and you may have an idea, you may have a view in relation to the comments that was made earlier.
I think we need to caution our callers. Our interest here is not in the election.
No. I am not.
Who won, who lose, who thief, who cheat, and all of that. That's not our interest.
No,
Our interest is in recognizing the real problem, which elections puts us on notice about once again, and looking for
in
a
each
solution.
cycle we have these problems. Every time the cycle comes around.
Beyond these dysfunctional elections, which are a part of the problem that we face with.
You're on the air.
Good morning. So why we as youth darling go for your part?
What is that? I didn't get that.
Why we as the youth darling y'all pass over?
Because you have to be,
Then what happened to y'all? Why y'all doing it to the youth?
the youths have to be themselves conscious and participatory in the
And
decision.
it's wicked big men, y'all love to rape women and get away with it.
Now you becoming rather vulgar and
No,
indecent.
man. No,
we
listen.
wouldn't entertain any
No,
longer.
man. Sorry. Yes,
That's an absurd intervention.
no. It's the whole question. The people. Yeah, morning on here. Yeah, morning. Hello. Yes, thank you.
Could you speak up a little louder?
Yeah, one thing, Vincent, you know what the history. But what I'm looking forward to, right? I'm looking forward to is that I don't believe you got to broker into this issue. Because anytime, from my observation, anytime any leader from both ethnic parties, one try to give in, the other side not so. And I go back and Plymouth Vincent talk about history and look at history there too, right? Now, could you imagine so much Africans died to a certain ethnic leader? You understand me?
Yeah.
Now we get a shame. And that man, what they now try to bring, because you see what anti-racism, right? As Vincent says, we'll get 90% or 99% of one ethnic voting. And that area has not been touched. Structure, and we could go on. And that same reason, just other issues, the other region would be most than the other ethnic. I know what happened. We gone back to square one. I'm not seeing that none of the other ethnic groups decide to do what that one tried to do. Right? And you listen to what this leader says. Red and green, and he will call the red and green. But when the red go, green is nowhere. And I see no future to that. No matter what you do, I am not seeing future. I'm not seeing future. And that's why if you look at it, you may, my percentage is no African Guyanese is out of Guyana more than 8. Right? We are and I don't see this problem because remember, look at it too. Right? The Europeans, I don't think that's the story. They are don't start condemning.
Yes.
Condemning. To the highest. We can sanction you. You got to tell me because you know what I mean? They keep a bad man come to my house. Big strong man. And tell me if I don't get out my house. You understand me? What are you going to do? And this is what's happening in Guyana.
Well, I think that Mr. Alexander has put it in perspective in terms of how we got where we are in relation to the various groups that make up the Guyanese society.
All right. I think the problem with what you're saying, I understand what you're saying, but the problem with what you're saying is that you see my proposition as giving in. And that is where I differ. There's no issue here of giving in. There's an issue here of accepting that there is a problem.
Yes.
And that acceptance has to come from everyone. And in accepting, then seeking to forge a solution. Because the fact of the matter is that Guyana, we all live in Guyana. And whether one set of people go in and do for themselves and don't do for others, and another set come in and don't do for themselves and do for others, Guyana as a collective cannot optimize the use of its resources, material and human, for the overall development of all Guyanese.
In an arrangement like that.
In any of the circumstances that exist now, we continue to have all kinds of sufferation. You have identified sufferation where you're saying, look, a good man come in and he is overthrowing to the others and he neglecting his own. There's a reason for that, if that is so. And we can't continue to have that either. So we need a system that moves away from one group appealing to its own. A system where we are imposed upon to work together. So that the nation benefits from what we do. And so we have to have a conversation about what can that system be and how we can implement that system.
I agree with you with that point. I agree with you with that point. I support that 100%. But just go back to issue 2. Issue 2, right? You laid Desmond White.
Desmond White did not try what I'm talking about.
No, he fired away.
He didn't try. The only person who tried it to some extent is Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham and Cheddy Jagan. Those are the only person. Nobody else has tried it.
No,
right?
What they're saying is, no, those same two founders died. But what I'm saying to you, my point is that they're going to try to bring us in a way together by...
Desmond White's approach was an open market economic approach, which has its problems.
Fine, I'm here now. Do you know that most of those policies that I make, it benefits one ethnic, that even call it 10%? I'm saying to you, I want to make the point.
All right, I agree with you. And it is history repeating itself. Why? Because when the slavery was abolished, it is the open market approach, quote unquote, which was used. And what did they do? So that Desmond White's approach may have been beneficial in terms of macroeconomics, but certainly was not an approach that provided for a resolution of the antagonism between the groups.
I get what you say. I don't really want to go to but I'm saying to you, right?
It's a discussion. Let me
so
say.
We have to have the conversation.
It's a discussion.
I think you agree we have to have the
Mm.
conversation. And the conversation has to be built on the premise that we understand what the problem is. And we have some idea of what we want the solution to be. The solution has to be to create a society that provides for everybody to have equal opportunity,
equal input into whatever
equal
program
opportunity
is
to
presented
realize their potential,
to all Guyana,
and not to stifle any one group.
I agree with you, but then again, though, I'm saying to you, I'm saying when Petty died, and Burnham died, well, whoever take those monsters did not.
But they did not. But we are not there. We are
there. We gotta try to do something now.
And we have to look back to see how we got to where we're at. We have to look back to learn from experiences in the attempt to solve the problem. And we have to go from now, informed by the past, moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
We are not at height stage.
Yes.
But we have to learn from that experience. We have to learn from that experience. 97 was not a real attempt.
We're talking about 49. 1949.
97, you are going back to the issue which I said we are not looking at. We are not looking at compromise. We are looking at a conversation to get a mutual approach to a problem, not compromise. 97 is irrelevant here. 97 was compromise. Nobody has to make no compromise because everybody has to benefit equally. So it's not compromise. It is a recognition of the problem, and recognizing the problem, you come to a position which says, look, if we don't work together, the problem will persist. You're not compromising, you're not giving up anything. In fact, you're making a contribution to betterment.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. I'm not seeing.
Well, you're not seeing it. But hopefully we will get there. We are advocating now.
And we want you to join us in that call.
All right, thank you very much for calling. Morning, on here.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
I like the topic and I agree with you guys. I'm a young person and I'm just calling in relation to the person who called and saying why young people have to live your past. I think it's a good initiative because I feel like if we would see less crime in the community and in the economy, and we would learn a lot more in terms on how to build ourselves up as young people and independent people who will contribute and give back to Guyana.
All right.
So I just wanted to say good job.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Good. Morning, on here.
Good morning,
Yeah, morning. How are you doing? I need you to speak a little louder, please.
the Ministry of Information.
Who's this?
Scout, David Sandiford,
Oh, David. Hey. What's happening, David? How you doing?
who have Vincent.
Yeah, man.
Vincent explained some more about the interference since in the Jordan and Burnham time
Mm-hmm.
of the international personnel interfering every time they try to come together. There was always some interference from outside. And this is again repeating itself in this present situation, where you find that even though there's this big division, there's also external interference in our country.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to Vincent to explain something.
Oh, you want him to comment on that? Vincent.
What I would say about the external people is that they come here and seek to impose upon us universal norms. And, you know, one plaster don't fit all. We have peculiar circumstances, historical circumstances, that need to be addressed. And I don't know that they necessarily address those. They come with the international universal plaster and try to make that
Applicable.
our prescription. It has not worked. It is not working. And we need to look inwards for our own solution.
Yeah, morning, you're on here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
At this moment, I'm somewhat pleased that someone has a call.
Go, I didn't get you clearly. Go that again.
Please speak a little louder.
At this moment, I'm pleased that the group of people, that you guys have the goal, more or less the bravado to come and face the people at a time with your conversation. And I like the approach that you're not beating around the bush. You're saying that there is no compromise. You have an idea. You think it's workable, and you would like it to be dead free.
Yes.
And I like that posture. In that, you know, we've been given a lot of complexion.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody, not a lot of people have been prepared to say exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Look, somebody has too much of the cake, and it cannot be partake like this. We cannot come to the dinner when we may be getting just the crumbs.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a party and we're invited, and we're not invited because we're a passenger. We're part of the family.
Yes.
We ought to be able to come and eat it, and then if we don't like it, we say, okay, put this back, we don't like this, we don't like that. But not to be, this is a predestined sort of arrangement.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like you guys to hold to that, and let it go out there. Listen, we're not taking away anything from anybody, but with what's happened to our thing that we haven't, your promises, and the people that we put to represent us, when they go there, they forget the arrangement, they forget the contract they make, and along the line they get fat and they get greedy and they leave us out, and it ought not to happen. So I would like you to hold your point and let it be clear, let it be crystal clear that this arrangement requires some muscle and rigging or stealing or whatever.
There is a problem that needs to be addressed. I agree with you wholeheartedly, and thank you for calling. Yeah, morning on here.
Hi,
Yes, morning.
good morning. I am of the opinion that the hybrid Westminster model need a bit of further reformation so that we can go to a position where the feeling of equality in the racial frame, and so that we can move forward collectively as a nation. I like Vincent as justice.
Yeah, you like Vincent to comment on that?
Well, I don't know whether it's merely clean up the Westminster model, but Westminster model. But I think that the fact that you said that, you have accepted that the model as it is not working. And so I think we have a starting point in that regard. The model has not and is not working, and therefore there's a need for us to address it. I think one of the problems we've had in the past in addressing the issue is that we seem to address it superficially.
On my cell phone, please.
All right, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Morning, you're on here. Hello, miss her.
Yeah, we seem to address the problem superficially.
Morning, you're on the air. Morning.
Hello.
Yes, morning. Please speak a little louder.
A pleasant good morning, yes, sir.
Yeah, morning, please.
Vincent has made a very astonishing contribution.
Yes.
Yeah. Another part of antagonism is, as our population is 45% Indian, open bracket, 145,000 close bracket, and as our constitution involves political equality of all races, we are really offering India a colony of its own, and in our eastern coast of South America, with fertile soil and healthier climate than that of India or any large tropical country. We, the Indian representatives of the imperial colonization deputation of British Guyana, now formally state that it is our desire, aim and object, if possible, to induce more Indians from the motherland to join our ranks, increase our numbers, to help us to make British Guyana an Indian colony. In the interest of the Indian community of the colony, it is desirable to bring to the notice of the countrymen in India the opportunities now being offered by the government of British Guyana for the development of the resources of the colony, and submit to them a scheme that is something campus of free and voluntary state-aided immigration, which what is the hope be of mutual benefit to those now in the colony, and as well as to the intended colonies. The international community needs to know about this as another part of antagonism.
Yes, I agree with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your contribution.
God forbid that scheme formally did not see the light of day. But I think we have to accept that the scheme represented the thinking of people, and there may still be people who are thinking in that manner. And so as we seek to resolve our problem, we have to take into consideration what are the thought processes that we need to deconstruct as well.
Yes. Morning, you're on here.
Good morning, Mr. Hinds and Mr. Alexander.
Morning.
It's a pleasure to speak to both of you. I must say that I enjoyed everything that Mr. Alexander was saying, but I believe that this should be taught more in school. Guyana's history should be taught more so that these young people would come to the understanding and the realization of what bring about
these problems we have
in our country today. I commend you all very much for what you have done this morning. And if something like this can be done more often, because a lot of these young people doesn't know their history, and Guyana history must be taught in school. I don't know how this could happen and when, but we have to come to a realization that this has to happen for us to have this cohesiveness in Guyana. Once again, I thank you all.
All right.
Continue to spread the word and let us have the things that what Mr. Granger was doing. He wasn't doing a corner and leave another corner where another nation is. And that is what we want. That is what you were trying to bring about. And every one of the 6 nation races should see what you were talking about.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for calling.
Thank you very much. Just to let you know, putting on another cap, International Decade to People of African Descent Assembly Guyana has already petitioned the Ministry of Education for the reintroduction of history into our school system, Guyanese history into our school system.
And additionally, on this program, I have advocated that there should be a bipartisan group put together to address this whole question of Guyanese history. Morning, on the air.
Good morning, Mr. Hinds. Good morning, Mr. Alexander.
Morning, sir.
It is unfortunate that we find ourselves in a whirlpool pertaining to politics and legal affairs in this country. The fact of the matter is that we need electoral reform, and there are elements in the Constitution that necessitate upfront constitutional reform before we get to do the entire Constitution. This is a pending issue in the country and its leadership at this point in time. simply this: Article 84 is being abused by a party in order to put restraint and hold on the progress of elections completion within a reasonable time frame. And the other aspect is constitutional reforms pertaining to, I think it's Article 103, that says to resolve problems, you go to the election petition thereafter. But I want to look back at two issues pertaining to management and administration.
You talking about elections, huh?
Again?
You talking about elections. We're not talking about elections. We have found elections, whether 84 or 80 what, it's dysfunctional. And so we're looking beyond elections.
We've seen that, but I want to suggest a solution. Because the fact of the matter is you went into the history of political relations, which is not really benefiting this country to this time. Strong and healthy and working legal minds, and minds that are in certain positions, should be able to have foresight and resolve these problems by stipulation of systems and methodologies that will avoid them happening.
Which problems you talking about? Which problems you talking about?
The problems with what we're experiencing with the election.
We're not talking about electoral problems. You don't understand what I'm saying here? We ain't talking about elections. We're saying elections, good or bad, run good or run bad, in this country are dysfunctional in terms of our national problem. So we don't need, we're not addressing 84 and 85 and how you think those.
But the solution I'm recommending in order to wrap it up.
Yeah. To wrap what up? To wrap what up? We're not here discussing wrapping up elections. Let us wrap itself up.
Let me say this very quickly. Article 84 and the principle of legal reform and legal conditions has a principle called admissibility. If we stipulate...
My friend,
no, I think you're going...
We said up front on this program, we are not discussing the problems with the elections. You are persistent to discuss the problem with the elections. We deal with the national problem of
that
ethnic antagonism and the need for us to have a governance system
that serves everybody.
To solve the problem.
Stipulate by a document coming from GICO or any other aspect of legal.
Or listen, I think
our
you're going.
Our time is up, and you're persisting where we're not going.
Call me after the program. I'll speak with you. Thank you. Thank you for coming through. Yes, I like the contribution of the lady, because in relation to our history that needs to be recorded in our school, people need to, that our history needs to be taught in our schools. I try, like I said earlier, on when we have these programs, we try to bring to our people education in relation to issues that affect Guyanese. And on today's program, we try very simply going back historically to what affected us, how we got where we are in relation to the various groups that came into this country and create this group of people called Guyanese, and some of the problems that we face, and we try in a simple way to show what needs to be done so that we can avoid these pitfalls or issues every time an election kind of cycle comes around. And Mr. Alexander has been very clear in giving us that outline, and I trust that what we have been able to do on this program today will cause persons out there to perhaps look at our situation more seriously and try to come to the table with ideas and proposals that can address this issue, our ethnic problems, our racial problems, whatever, so that we can really move together as one unit called Guyanese. I am seeing the lines going. I have just half a minute, and I will try to take this call. Morning on there. Morning, you got half a minute, sir.
A pleasant good morning to you.
Morning, yes.
The scheme was meant for activation and not implementation.
What's the difference?
It's to be of mutual benefit to those now in the colony, as well as...
There's no difference between activation and implementation. It's the same thing.
Activation means to implement.
No.
The scheme was done, don't be thing. The scheme was never formally implemented. We accept that there may be people whose minds are keen to the scheme, and in what they have been doing, They've been attempting to manifest thoughts in the scheme. And therefore, you got to deconstruct those people's thoughts.
I want to, yeah, thank you, Donald. I want to thank all those who have been listening to this program today. And Vincent, I want to thank you very much for that expose in relation to our history. And I would want to encourage all of our people out there who have been looking at this program, who have an understanding as to the issues that affect us today, to perhaps come up with ideas as to how we can address this issue about ethnic problems. Our time has come to a close, and I want to thank all of you who have been with me today on this program, and I want to promise you that we wouldn't have a break for three months again, but we will have our program each month to address issues in relation to our country and the contribution that Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham has made to development of Guyana and its peoples. My name is Clayton Hinds, and I want to thank you very much for being with me. And I want to thank Mr. Alexander for being with us on the program today. And thank you all very much.
And don't forget to observe the advisement of the government on coronavirus.
COVID-19. I am maintaining my distance.
Social distance.